Hello, this is Prof. Shees, and this video will focus on developing our TESOL teaching philosophy. So as we've been taking our classes, going to our field experience, we've begun to develop a philosophy of TESOL teaching or TESOL pedagogy. What does best practice look like, or what do we value in a classroom? So in this video, I want us to keep developing that philosophy by focusing on 4 key influences. We'll start with TESOL theory, so those acquisition theories that might influence how we teach. We're going to focus on asset mindsets. We're going to discuss culturally responsive teaching, and then we're going to end on a few other considerations. So let's start with TESOL theory. This stems from second language acquisition, and there are several camps like cognitive, behavioral, or social camps of how we believe language is learned or acquired. So with TESOL practice, what you need to do is understand how you believe language is learned and how that might influence your teaching. So with this chart, I've outlined some key second language acquisition theories and how they might show up in your teaching or practice. So for example, social interaction theory from Vygotsky is a very popular theory. It's the idea that language is learned from social interaction, that we learn from a need to communicate with others and from watching others, that we model this internal dialogue in the real world. If you believe that as well, that that's how language is acquired, your teaching might be communicative language teaching, in which you have a lot of situations that require interaction, such as pair or group work. Your course would focus on authenticity, so scenarios or creating products and artifacts that are used, that they have purpose, so students feel like they're exchanging real communication. Communicative language teaching also really values culture and that what students produce is meaningful to their development. In another light, maybe you're a constructionist or connectionist. With connectionist, it's really heavy on cognition, the idea that our brain is, we got these neuron pathways that are just waiting to connect to each other. And with that, we have Krashen, who said, to build those connections, to make those neurons, buzz, we need input. That the more input we give people, the more likely they are to make connections. And if you believe that's how language is acquired, you might approach teaching with an emergent or natural approach, the idea that it's all input, that the whole class is taught in English, that it's embedded in content, and that you focus on making input accessible and salient or highly frequent. So you might color code things, you would repeat things a lot, you would combine modes of input, so you would have visuals with the spoken word. So as we can see, depending on what you believe regarding second language acquisition, it would impact your practice. So with that, to kind of review, which of these theories would fit with something like Dora the Explorer? What approach is she taking? Or if you studied abroad, what theory of language acquisition does that meet? Or if you were teaching a content course like a math class that had ESL students, what theory does that meet? Become a little bit more familiar with these theories and terminology, and once you're comfortable with them, I think you can focus on picking your theory. So how do you think language is best learned, or how do you think it should not be learned? What are some misconceptions about language learning, and what theory disproves that myth? Or what methods do you enjoy using, and what theory justifies them? Answering those questions can help guide you into selecting your motivation or what theory informs you. Next up on our list was asset-based mindset or essential mindset. This is in a direct counter to a very common way of thinking, which is deficit thinking, the idea that students have problems that are meant to be fixed. So the student has a condition or has a aspect of their identity that is hindering them. It's a deficit to the classroom. That's kind of a gross way of thinking. And in response to that, teachers have been promoting asset-based mindset, the idea that students are not problems that we need to fix, but they're unique people, and they actually have strengths that we can motivate and develop. And that by focusing on these strengths, those problems we have or those problems we notice tend to go away, or that we can better tackle them from a more positive perspective. So if you want to apply asset-based mindset, you would focus on the knowledge and skills students already possess and build on them. So integrating activities that students enjoy, helping them use like a domain they're most comfortable with as a scaffold for a domain they're less comfortable with. So if you're interested in that asset mindset and applying it to your own teaching philosophy, you might brainstorm activities to help you discover student strengths, language, culture, and background. If you want some ideas, you can check out Wita's Can-Do Philosophy online, but I'd also recommend Breaking Down the Wall. That text on page 15 has a chart about different ways to be asset-minded. And then Singer Chapter 2 in EL Excellence Every Day has a bunch of activities that can help build students' assets. Third thing we have is a focus on culture and being culturally responsive. Culture is often called the fifth language domain. The idea being that reading, writing, listening, and speaking are all influenced by cultural expectations. So when we teach those things, we kind of have to teach culture, or we are teaching culture, even if we aren't aware of it. With this too, if we have learners that come from different cultures, we have to ask ourselves, is their culture being respected and represented? Is it being really integrated, given how essential it is to identity and language? Just led to something called culturally responsive teaching, which is the idea that the teacher is knowledgeable of culture's influence and is responsive, reactive, reflective to it, that it's more integrated or intentionally integrated. As a definition, here's from Hammond wrote Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain, and it was assessment of this theory as it relates to neuroscience, a very interesting read. But they give this really great definition, and I've bolded the verbs or key words to show all that culturally responsive teaching is. So the definition is an educator's ability to recognize students' cultural displays of learning and meaning making and respond positively and constructively with teaching moves that use cultural knowledge as a scaffold to connect what the student knows to new concepts and content in order to promote effective information processing. All the while, the educator understands the importance of being in a relationship and having social emotional connection to the student in order to create a safe space for learning. With this definition in mind, there are a lot of critiques of culturally responsive teaching because it's often misinterpreted as performative. Some teachers put a poster on a wall and they think that's culturally responsive, or they buy a Spanish-English dictionary and they say, I'm culturally responsive. But as we could see from the definition and verbs, culturally responsive teaching is much more than that. There's a focus on community, relationships, and rapport, getting to know your students and treating them as people. It's about attitudes and beliefs, establishing a classroom with firm standards, expectations of how we treat others. It's awareness of privilege, especially your personal privilege and how that might influence things. It's a critique of the system and an advocacy for change, that when we see wrongdoings in the world, that we're actively going against them or fighting against them. It's a building of cultural knowledge and teaching and an adaptation of methodology, knowing that the way we teach is culturally influenced and that we need to be more respectful of other cultures or other ways of doing things. To end, there are just some additional considerations for modeling or creating your teaching philosophy. One is trauma-informed pedagogy, the idea that trauma affects how we learn. And so we have to attend to that trauma in order to support healing and support learning. This is especially relevant with language learners who have immigrated. They might experience new things for the first time that can trigger them or be traumatic. So for example, fire drill alarms, that sound, a family tree assignment in which they have to recall deaths in the family might be hard, or how you group students, so things about what genders can interact or who people are comfortable with. In this way, it's a lot like culture responsive asset-based mindset in that you are attending to students' individual needs, understanding how they are influenced by these things. And then lastly, language ideology. This is kind of like second language acquisition theory, and that it's our views of how languages learn, but not just learn, but how language is used. So politically, socially, morally, what is correct language, or how should language be used? How does language equate to value, worth, identity? Asking ourselves these questions or breaking down language in this way helps us structure what we teach. It also helps us structure our advocacy, so emphasizing that multilingualism is a valuable asset, that there isn't a really strong focus on correctness, it's just on communication. And it also helps us counter things like xenophobia and English-only laws. So with this is a lot of information to help inform our teaching philosophy. So as you complete your field experience and go about your practice, try and have in mind, why are you making these decisions? And who does that make you as a teacher?